Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Make sure to like and subscribe if you want. Disclaimer. There may be mature content and maybe 18 plus content, and I don't own this story. With that stuff out of the way, let's begin. Chapter 24. Wednesday was always a highlight of their week. Why, you ask? Simple, Wednesday is tea day with Netsu-san. This has been a tradition for at least 3 years now, and how could they not love it? Drinking tea, playing chess, practicing analysis, and plotting the demise of their enemies. You know, the usual. Izuku was jumping up and down on their way to the director's office. As usual, as soon as they raise their hand to knock, the door opens by itself. This trick stopped surprising them in the second week, but the principal never stopped using it. To be fair, the only ones who are no longer surprised are Izuku, Aizawa, and Yamada, all former students of the Rat Satan. Izuku enters without much ceremony and sits down in his usual chair right in front of the principal's desk. As usual, a fresh cup of tea awaited him. Jasmine, Izuku's favorite. Good morning, Izuku. The rat greeted cheerfully, then gave his animalistic grin that he avoids showing most people. I'm sure you're eager to get started, so we can skip the pleasantries. He pressed a button under the table, opening a secret compartment with 2 black folders. Absolutely. Kuzu replied with his own grin. His primary inspiration was his dad, but that doesn't mean his grin seems any less intimidating than the principal's. Unfortunately, to continue the flaming garbage can project, we depend on yet another mistake by our target. Not that this is difficult to happen, but that doesn't mean that we can't focus elsewhere for the time being. The first folder, entitled Flaming Trash Can, is the case they have been working on for the last 3 years. Progress was slow, but in those 3 years, they've been gradually undermining the credibility of the number 2 hero. Spreading a few rumors, revealing numbers and statistics that the commission tried to hide, a video here and there recorded when the hero thought there was no one. With all their progress, they're just waiting for Endeavor himself to seal his coffin. One more slip is all they need for this. Of course, Endeavor's PR team is not sleeping on the job. They have been extra careful to prevent this from happening. In short, at the moment, they are in a war of attrition. They could end it all right now. Netsu and Izuku have more than concrete evidence of Endeavor's abuse of his family. All it takes is one statement from Tuya, backed by Tsukauchi, and it's all over. But if possible, they want to avoid involving the family. They have already suffered too much because of the so-called hero. They don't deserve all the public on their backs, let alone having to deal with the vultures. They will only use this if, by the sports festival, they can't get anything else against Endeavor. The second folder, entitled Project Vigilante, is basically a list of all the known vigilantes who have a chance of being invited to participate in the project. But from the looks of it, Netsu doesn't intend to work on any of these projects today. Instead, he has put a new folder in front of them. This one is entitled League of Villains. Let's start from the beginning. The principal said. What do we know about them? Well, time to analyze. Izuku begins to remember everything he has collected about the villains. The reports from the students and teachers, what Dabi and Himiko revealed, and what they witnessed themselves are enough to shed light on the case. And the conclusion that Izuku comes to is that there is something very strange here. From what we have collected, they have only 3 members. All the rest of the villains were just cannon fodder. Izuku started explaining, already pulling a notebook to write his theories. The goal was to kill All Might, and to do this they brought a multi-quirk bio-engineered weapon made exclusively to fighting. They clearly did not plan things very well. Even if we consider that they somehow knew that All Might was weakened and that the creature would be able to kill him, practically any other hero could beat the creature. It had an exposed brain. Kuzu said, exasperated. 13 could disintegrate the creature in seconds. No super regeneration would save it from that. Snipe would have no problem shooting the brain. Mick could literally blow it up. Even I would have no problem continuing to burn it if it hadn't taken me by surprise. And that's the weirdest part. Izuku said thoughtfully. Their plan makes no sense. What do you mean? Netsu asked. Kurajiri appeared in front of us when we were trying to evacuate the students. Izuku explained. He scattered the students around and tried to stop 13 from escaping. But that's all, he didn't seem to be fighting seriously for even a second. As soon as the students were through the door, he gave up on them instead of giving chase. With his quirk, chasing them would be easy. And then we have Shigaraki. Kuzu continued. He is a walking contradiction. Within minutes he noticed Dad's tell and the timing of his quirk. Most would never notice. This points to high intelligence and a strategic mind. But also, he simply bragged and passed on all the details about the creature to Dabi. The same Dabi who is basically one of the best known informants in the underworld. Izuku said. We were far away so we couldn't hear what he said. But Dad said he constantly used gaming slang. According to him, the terms he used are commonly used in RPGs and strategy games. The fact that their dad is secretly a gamer is a secret that he thinks Izuku doesn't know. He clearly knows who Dabi is. After all, he has approached him a few times trying to get him to join the league. Kuzu sighed. Shigaraki makes no sense. It's like he wanted their plan to fail. And finally, the so-called sensei. Izuku said. Whoever they are. they're the key to the mystery. Tsukoko knows something, and apparently so does All Might. But none of them told us anything yet. All we know is that this sensei is someone powerful and influential enough to secretly create a creature with multiple quirks that only moves when ordered to. Kuzu summarized. And that apparently All Might thought he had killed them. Netsu actually shows surprise at this information. Worryingly, nothing surprises the rat. You know something, don't you, Netsu-san? Izuku asked. I know, but I can't share it with you yet. Netsu replied. Sorry, Izuku. Well, this just became more troublesome then. Kuzu sighed, then looked up. It seems that our time is up. We'll try to gather information, but I doubt we will find anything. Be careful, Izuku. If it's really who I think it is, he's dangerous. Netsu warned. Izuku got up and left the room, giving a salutation to the principal. Someone dangerous enough that Netsu had to warn him. Well, Izuku definitely won't disregard it. Izuku was strangely quiet. As soon as the last bell rang and the students started to leave, the teaching assistant appeared at the class's door and asked Shouta to follow him. But all the way there, he didn't say a single word. Shouta saw his lips moving, so probably both sides of him were having a silent conversation. But about what, Shouta couldn't even imagine. Not that he is trying very hard. He is too busy overthinking what is about to happen. He knows they are going to train. But what kind of training will it be? His only references are his sessions with Endeavor, and frankly, Shouta doesn't know if his ribs can handle something like this today. Since the SJ, Endeavor has gotten even more brutal with his training. The amount of bruises Shouta has when he finishes his training has doubled overnight. He is constantly on the verge of fainting, to the point that Shouta is beginning to fear that he will end up like Tuya. His thoughts are interrupted by a door opening. He enters, following Izuku, who immediately heads for a locker. A few seconds later, he returns with a cold compress and hands it to Shouta. I live with Eraserhead. It is impossible to hide wounds from us, Todoroki-kun. Izuku said, smiling. Just take it, no questions asked. Kuzu continued. Shouta nodded, accepting the compress and pressing it against his chest. The relief was almost instantaneous. He could have done it himself if it wasn't so exhausting to keep his quirk activated constantly. Unceremoniously, Izuku sits down on the floor, crossing his legs, and gestures for Shouta to sit in front of him. Shouta copies him. When he sits down, Izuku already has their notebook in hand. Where did they get it from? Do they have a secondary quirk? Some kind of summoning, maybe. Well, Todoroki-kun. Izuku calls him. I wanted to do some tests with your ice before I started. But seeing the state you are in now, Izuku grits his teeth before continuing. Let's keep things small for now. Shouta opens his mouth to argue, but then closes it. He is right. Shouta is in no condition to try anything too taxing at the moment. Especially knowing that he will have to train with Endeavor again when he gets home. Let's start with your fire then. Kuzu said, and before Shouta could reply, he raised a hand. Let's just do some simple exercises. I have some theories about your quirk, and I want to test them. Shouta takes a deep breath, then nods. Kuzu smiles at him, then raises his left hand. I didn't always have control over my flames. Kuzu explains with a small green flame dancing in his hand. He places his other hand over the flame and begins to move it as if he were modeling clay. One of the first things I realized is that my emotions affect temperature, especially anger. The first time I used it, I ended up with a second-degree burn on my hand. He opened his hands, and the flame was shaped like a rabbit. It wasn't very serious, but I felt terrible for making Zu suffer yet another burn. Shouta watched the rabbit, surprised at the level of control Kuzu showed. Is it even possible for him to achieve something like that? How? He asked. Lots of practice. Kuzu smirked. Then his expression softened as the rabbit vanished. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Todoroki. Fire is dangerous. It is much easier to safely immobilize someone using your ice than your fire. Just look at your sperm donor. He has the highest capture rate among all the heroes, and the highest property damage rate, and the highest fatality rate, villains, civilians, and other heroes alike. Kuzu sighed. Frankly, he acts like a caveman. Yuga, me use hot fire, villain is gone. Then he starts laughing, which makes Shouta laugh too. Oh, my god. That was perfect. Shouta says, wheezing. They sober again a few seconds later, and Kuzu goes back to his explanation. He takes off his left glove and shows Shouta his scarred hand, the same he showed the class during the quirk assessment test. That was the last time I completely lost control of my emotions. This scar is a memory of how dangerous my flames are, even though I am resistant to them. Imagine what they can do to someone with no resistance. Kuzu explained. Shouta's mind instantly went to Tuya. Shouta was really young when his brother was alive, but he remembers the scars vividly. Before I teach you power, I want you to learn control. If my theories are correct, your level of control can far exceed mine. Kuzu said, raising his index finger, and a small flame appeared in it. Try lighting a weak flame, such as a lighter. Shouta nodded and raised his left index finger, but nothing happened. He tried to concentrate more, thinking about the feeling of warmth. but all he could remember was the burns that endeavor had caused him. Instinctively his hand began to shake until he felt another hand on his. He looked up and saw a pair of blue eyes looking at him with kindness. "It's okay, Todoroki-kun. Remember what we said," Izuku said softly. "Repeat after me. This quirk is mine, and Endeavor can take his opinion and shove it straight up his ass." "This quirk is mine, and Endeavor can take his opinion and shove it straight up his ass," Shouta said. "This quirk is mine, and Endeavor can take his opinion and shove it straight up his ass," he repeated as his hand stopped shaking. "This quirk is mine, and Endeavor can take his opinion and shove it straight up his ass. This quirk is mine, and Endeavor can take his opinion and shove it straight up his ass." He kept mentally repeating it and slowly calmed down. Then he tried lighting the flame again, and this time he did it. When he saw the small flame on his finger, he felt much more proud of himself than he had ever felt before. Izuku put his hand above the flame and looked at Shouta, smiling. "Warp," he said. "You see, you are nothing like Endeavor, Todoroki. That man's flames only cause suffering. Yours are warm as an embrace, you just have to learn to use them to protect instead of destroy." "Thank you," Shouta said, watching the small flame on his finger, ignoring the feeling of something wet running down his face. After that, they decided to stop the session here. They still had some time, but Izuku insisted that Shouta go see Recovery Girl before returning home. And Shouta couldn't refuse, not with those concern-filled eyes looking at him. As soon as they were sure that Todoroki was far enough away not to hear them, Kuzu screamed, followed by a full-force punch to the ground. "Fucking Endeavor." He punched the ground again, leaving a fist mark on the soft floor. How can someone like that be a hero? He lifted his fist again, but a hand caught before he could punch again. "You're going to hurt yourself, Kuzu," Izuku said, gently holding his hand. Then he sighed. "I envy you sometimes, Kuzu. I wish I could feel anger for what he did. I have enough anger for both of us." Kuzu replied gently. "You are perfect just like you are, Zu." Izuku smiled, then steeled his expression. "Yes, this changes the plan, right?" Izuku said, already pulling his phone. "Oh, you bet," Kuzu replied, dialing Netsu's number. The rat answered the call quickly, and Kuzu immediately started talking. "Netsu-san. Change of plan. Endeavor needs to fall this weekend. And we already have a plan." Chapter 25. On Thursday, Izuku decided to observe the class closely all day. The reason for this is called Kaminari Denki. After reading his file and checking some of his old grades, Izuku saw some suspicious things, to say the least. Kaminari barely passed in subjects such as science and mathematics. But in English and literature, his grades were brilliant. His reports on some books were as deeply thought out as Izuku's own quirk analysis, and according to the English tests the students took in the first week, he is practically fluent. In short, Kaminari's notes in some areas are brilliant, while in others, they are abysmal. Izuku wants to observe exactly why. The blonde definitely doesn't seem to be the lazy type. A procrastinator perhaps, but not lazy. Izuku discreetly kept an eye on the blonde man during class, carefully keeping note of his interactions during the lessons. The first class was physics with Snipe. Kaminari, like all the other students, took his notebook to take notes. But the slightest noise seemed to distract him. Whether it was someone whispering near him or a fly flying near him. On another note, yes, Sue's frog instincts include eating flies. Half the room was horrified by the scene. Back to Kaminari, every time something distracted him, it would take him a few minutes to get back to writing his notes, only to be distracted by something else. Out of curiosity, Izuku floated one of his cameras over to watch his notes, and in the entire class, the teenager barely wrote 5 lines in his notebook. When the end of class bell rang, he looked startled, as if he hadn't noticed the time passing. The next class, in English with present Mick, was totally the opposite. Mick's classes are as eclectic as the loud blonde himself. It starts with him rearranging the chairs into a circle to have all the students directly in his line of sight. Most of the examples used in his explanations included everyday situations and many stories about journeys where the language difference caused funny scenes. Any and all conversations among the students were encouraged to be held in English as a form of practice. If anyone had any doubts about terms or expressions, Mick would immediately notice and help. Some students were still taking notes, but most were entirely focused on the explanation. And unlike the previous class, Kaminari was barely distracted during this one. So engaging lessons help him with the distraction problem. Noted. During study hall, Kaminari, along with Kirishima, Ashido, and Siro, gravitated toward Kasuki, surprisingly forming a study group. Kasuki proved to be an amazingly patient teacher, while helping them with mathematics. And despite having difficulty with the subject, Kaminari progressed during the period. Art with Midnight was a middle ground. Not as eclectic as English but much more engaging than physics. Kaminari was distracted a few times during the class, but didn't struggle with the subject nearly as much. Finally, Ethics and Laws with Eraserhead seemed to be physically painful for the blonde. By the end of the class, he could barely write 2 lines of notes. It was as if the professor was speaking in an alien language. The essay on the laws of public quirk usage that Aizawa assigned to the next class almost brought him to tears. As everyone was gathering their things to leave at the end of class, Kaminari was slumped on his seat, with his face buried in his arms. Izuku went up to him and gently shook him to get his attention. The blonde practically jumped in fright until he saw Izuku and blushed with embarrassment. Izuku did not comment and asked him to follow. On the way, Kuzu guiding while Izuku discreetly wrote a note, Kaminari filled the silence by talking about a horror movie he watched over the weekend. Something about a guy in a hockey mask who hunted down and killed teenagers at a campground. Upon entering Field Omega, Izuku guides Kaminari into another room with various machines and gestures to a chair. Kaminari nods and sits down, while Izuku looks for a specific device. A few seconds later, Izuku places a chair in front of him and sits down with a multimeter in his hand. He hands the wires to Kaminari and asks him to hold them between the fingers of his right hand. This is a multimeter made by Powloader to keep track of students with electrical quirks. All the data collected goes directly to the servers where I can calmly analyze it later. Izuku explained. I don't know the limits of your quirk, but frankly, from what I've seen, it's dangerously high. Kaminari looked down in shame, but before he could sulk much, Kuzu put a hand on his shoulder. You have nothing to be ashamed of, Kaminari. You have one of the most powerful quirks I've ever seen. If you could already control it completely, I'd be scared. Kuzu said. Kaminari-kun. Which do you think is easier, controlling the recoil of a pistol, or that of a sniper? Izuku asked. The pistol is much lighter, and the bullets have much less power. Kaminari said. A sniper is heavy, the bullet much stronger, controlling the recoil is much more difficult. Then he smiled. FPS. That's right, Kami. Kuzu smiled. Your power is like a sniper. Much more powerful, but much more difficult to control. But once you learn how to work it, you'll be nigh unstoppable. And for that, let's start training. Izuku continued. We have seen how high your voltage can reach, but how low can you go? For example, if I gave you a cable now, could you charge a cell phone? Kuzu asked. Oh, that's easy. Kaminari replied, picking a USB cable on his backpack and sticking it into his mouth, then on his phone. I always do that. Interesting. Kuzu said, then approached the multimeter wires. Open your mouth for a second. He put the wire in Kaminari's mouth and then checked the voltage. 5 volts. No variation. Then he pulled the USB cable and checked again. It didn't change. Can you do it with your hands too? Not quite. Kaminari replied. Last time I tried, I blew my phone. Which leads me to believe that certain parts of your body have a different energy output. The voltage in your mouth is much lower than in the rest of your body, perhaps a protection because it is near the brain. Izuku muttered. Alright, hold the wire between your finger, and try the lowest output you can get. Kaminari nodded and did as he said. Izuku checked the device. It instantly lit with 20.00 volts that started gradually lowering as Kaminari concentrated on reducing the output until it reached about 1.00 volts and froze it there, varying between 900 and 1.10 volts. Can you say how much you're using? Izuku asked. I would say, about 1.00 volts. Kaminari replied. And how do you know that? Kuzu asked curiously. That's a feeling. Kaminari said. I can also estimate the voltage of an outlet or wire, just by touching it. So, another part of your quirk. Izuku replied. That's so cool. The human body works with electrical signals. If you train yourself enough to recognize these signals, you will never need to worry about using too little or too much electricity. Kuzu continued. Okay, next test. Izuku ran excitedly into another room and returned with another device, this one full of wires, electrodes. Alright, shirt off. Kuzu said, making Kaminari blush. Kuzu, tact. Izuku chided. We need you to put these, he showed the electrodes. So we can see how your electricity runs through your body. Alright. Kaminari replied, taking off his blazer and shirt. Kuzu nonchalantly started sticking the electrodes on his chest, over the lungs and heart, in the belly over the stomach, in the arms and forearms, and in different parts of the head. Alright. Izuku said, taking a deep breath. I need you to charge your electricity and try to circulate it throughout your body. Keep the voltage as low as possible, we don't want you to short-circuit your brain. Kaminari nodded, and his body started glowing, just like when he used it to make light during the battle training. Soon all of his body was encased in electricity, making his hair stand up because of the static. Izuku kept his eye on the device, while Kuzu observed Kaminari glowing. They kept it for about 5 minutes, until Izuku deemed to have enough data and told him to stop. As Kaminari got dressed again, Izuku's brain raced a mile a minute, his mouth and hand just as fast as he wrote down, and mumbled everything he observed with his quirk test. But can you blame him? This quirk is amazing. Kaminari. Izuku called animatedly. Your quirk is incredible. Thanks. Kaminari replied, a little taken aback. Has your quirk counselor discussed with you how it works? Izuku asked, and Kaminari shook his head. Izuku sighed, a bit disappointed. Are they giving anyone a quirk counseling license these days? Then he pointed to a screen that started showing the image of a human body. This is you. Then, the body lightened up. This is you when you activate your quirk. And this means? Kaminari asked, not sure where this was going. Wait for it. Izuku replied, typing a few things on the keyboard, then the video reset and slowed down. This time, Kaminari can clearly see the moment the light started from his chest, started traveling all over his body and back to his chest, then repeating. Your quirk basically turns your heart into an electricity generator, Kaminari. The moment you activate it, each heartbeat sends an electric current through your veins, and that's how energy travels through your body. Low voltages are easier to control, so you can concentrate them on just one limb. But when you try a stronger attack, you get out of control. The electricity travels through your veins and literally leaks out of your body. The short circuit happens because a voltage above your limit passes through the brain. Wow. Kaminari looked attentively at the image. Then how do we fix it? Now that we know why and how your quirk works, we work on a way to control it. Kuzu explained. You have managed to reduce the voltage on your hands to about 1.00 volts. The first thing we will do is try to reduce it further. Reduce it? Why? Kaminari asked, tilting his head in confusion. As I said, your output is directly connected to your heart. Izuku explained. This means that in a fight, where your heart will inevitably speed up, your output will inevitably increase as well. Now, what happens if you exceed your limit in the middle of a fight against a villain? Then Kaminari's eyes widened. My brain short circuits, and I become vulnerable in the middle of the fight. And then you're dead, or captured and used as a hostage against your allies. Kuzu completed. Let's make sure that never happens, shall we? Alright. What do I do? Kaminari asked. To begin with, Izuku started rummaging through a few drawers in the room. Where did I leave them? Aha. He pulled out a stack of batteries, each with a different number, the largest of which had a 1000 and the smallest a 100. Each pack had 10 batteries. Training batteries, hold them between your thumb and forefinger, and then run an electric current through them. The number on them is the appropriate power. 10% margin of error. Pass a too high current and the battery will overcharge, but relax, it won't explode. Too low and it will not charge. If you can maintain the right voltage for 5 minutes, it will turn green. Kuzu explained. The goal is simple. Until the sports festival, your minimum output must be 500 volts. When you can fill up 5 batteries in sequence without burning any, you can go to the next one. In addition to controlled training, I have a suggestion for you. Izuku continued. With an adequate level of control, you could immobilize the majority of villains you meet with a single touch, similar to a taser. But for this, you need to train more in close combat. Of course, this part is to add specialty. Kuzu said, smirking when Kaminari paled. As he should, if there is one place is always ruthless, borderline sadistic, it is in training. And finally, tutoring. Kaminari paled even more at that. Tutoring? He asked. You mean like academically? Izuku sighed. Kaminari, do you know what ADHD is? He asked. ADHD? Kaminari asked. Mom said it isn't real. It's just an excuse. She's wrong. Kuzu huffed. ADHD is a completely real disorder. And from what we observed today, we think you might have it. Of course, to be sure we will have to do a real diagnosis. Izuku explained. I will talk to Granny Chio, and if everything goes well, you can undergo the exams tomorrow. But regardless, it is obvious that the teaching methods of most teachers are not working well for you. Kuzu continued. I'm just dumb like that. Kaminari shrugged. Kuzu gave him a karate chop on the head. Nope. He said like he was talking to a child. No self-depreciation here. But, no buts. Izuku interrupted. You are not dumb, Kaminari. Your grades in English and literature are more than enough proof. Nobody is good at everything. Kuzu continued. You struggle with some subjects and have an easy time with others. This is normal for everyone. What matters to us is to help you reach your potential. Izuku said. Yours and everyone else's. Kaminari nodded but said nothing more. He looked quite dumbfounded. Hitachi was walking home. The distance is only about a 10-minute walk from the UA. Putting it into balance, frankly, walking is better than returning with Aizawa driving. All the respect that Hitachi has for the hero is not enough to make him want a repeat of the experience. Hitachi is not suicidal, thank you very much. Anyway, for having love for his own life, he was walking. And because he was walking, he passed the entrance to an alley just in time to hear someone yelling and went to check it out. He found a man with a gun pointed at a tall, scrawny blonde man in the alley. Seriously, somebody give this guy a hamburger. He looks like a scarecrow. And for someone with a gun pointed at him, he was pretty calm. Simply trying to reason with the assailant. Watching the scene for a few seconds, Hitachi tried to talk himself out of it. The right thing to do is find a policeman or hero and ask for help. Hitachi still doesn't have a license. Shut up and give me everything. The mugger yelled again. I'll shoot. Oh, screw it, he's doing this. I just hope Aizawa or Izuku can bail me out. If I lose my spot at the hero course because of what I'm about to do. Chapter 26, Hitachi approaches the mugger silently, forcing himself to remain calm. If he makes a mistake here, someone will get shot. As soon as he gets close enough to make sure that the robber is in range of his quirk, he calls his attention. "Excuse me, mister," he calls. The mugger turns around to look at him, but keeps the gun pointed at the scarecrow guy. "Can't you just drop it and leave?" The guy frowns at Hitachi. "Shut you." Hitachi smirks as the man's expression blanks. "Got it out. Give me the gun, carefully," he orders, and the mugger does as he says. As soon as Hitachi picks up the gun, he removes the clip, the loaded bullet, and clicks the safety lock. Since it's only one person, Hitachi can keep control for a few hours, as long as no one bumps into him. He picks up his phone and starts calling Izuku. "Hi Tashi." They answer quickly. "Did something happen?" "Hi, Izuku, which one am I talking to?" Hitachi replies. "This is Izuku." Izuku explains. "Kuzu is reviewing our training plan for tomorrow." "Hi Tashi." Kuzu greets. "Anyway, I doubt you're calling just to hear our voice," Izuku says. "After all, we'll be seeing each other in a few hours." "I wish it was the case," Hitachi replies. "So I may have just engaged in an act of vigilantism." He explains and instantly hears Izuku getting up. "Send us your location," Kuzu says. "And don't leave, it'll be worse," Izuku adds. "Did you call the police?" "Not yet, you're the first one I called," Hitachi explained. "And there's a civilian that was being mugged. We're coming." Then they drop the call. Hitachi instantly sends his location to Izuku's number and turns to keep an eye on the mugger, who hasn't moved since Hitashi's last command. "Young SH," the man starts, then coughs in his hand. "I mean, young boy, why did you do that?" Hitachi turns around and sees the skinny man looking at him curiously. Not a hint of fear or disgust, just confusion and curiosity. So Hitachi deems it safe to answer his question. "He was pointing a gun at you. I couldn't simply do nothing, you know. I want to be a hero." Hitachi shrugged. "But you used your quirk illegally, won't that get you in trouble?" The man pointed. "Probably will." Hitachi sighed. "I'm just hoping they won't expel me. But I don't regret helping someone who needed it, even if it costs your dream," the man said, and Hitachi nodded slowly. The two were silent for a few seconds. When the silence started to get awkward, Hitachi opened his mouth to say something. But before he could say anything, the man coughed up blood that splashed onto his suit, and Hitashi's face, and his mouth. This surprised them both, especially Hitachi, who frankly didn't expect to end up accidentally drinking the blood of a stranger. But before he could ask if the man was fine, someone dropped down in the alley and made a beeline to Hitachi. Hitachi instantly recognized that black cloak. In just a second, Izuku was already fussing over him. "Tashi, are you hurt? Do I need to call an ambulance?" "Oh my god, this is blood. I'm calling an ambulance," Izuku said quickly, and Hitachi stopped him before he pulled up his phone. "I'm fine, bunny. This blood is not mine." He pointed to the skinny man, and when Izuku saw him, he frowned. "Do they know each other?" Then Izuku turned back to Hitachi. "What happened? Don't hide anything." Hitachi knew better than to lie, so he told them exactly what had happened since he left to go home, working because he has a love for life. He heard a sound coming from the alley, and when he checked, he found a robbery in progress. He considered leaving and looking for a hero, but was afraid it would be too late. Then, how he got the mugger's attention caught him with his quirk and disarmed him. "I'm sure there were other ways to deal with the situation," he says, avoiding Izuku's eyes. "I could have attacked by surprise and taken his weapon without using my quirk. But then, a single mistake and someone would have been shot. Using my quirk was the safest way to do things without anyone getting hurt." "Hitachi, look at me," Kuzu says, and Hitachi looks at him. "What you did was dangerous and irresponsible. If something had gone wrong, someone could have been killed. Not to mention that vigilantism could cost you your spot on the hero course that you fought so hard to get," Kuzu scolded. Hitachi looked down as he felt tears gathering in his eyes. Having said that, Hitachi felt arms around his shoulder. When he looked up, Izuku, one eye each color, was hugging him. "Well done, Tashi." "What?" Hitachi asked in complete disbelief. "Well done. What does he mean by well done? You knew the risks, and you knew the possible consequences. Yet you risked yourself to save someone else. That's heroism, Tashi," Izuku explained. "We are not supporting vigilantism, don't get it wrong. I really hope it doesn't happen again, but you have done well." Hitachi nodded, wiping the unshed tears from his eyes, while Izuku took a zip tie from his cloak and used it as a makeshift handcuff to restrain the mugger. "What now?" Hitachi asked. "I'll take care of it, you go home. If Dad asks about the blood," Izuku pointed to the skeleton man Hitachi had forgotten was still there. "Just say that you bumped into Yagi-san and he had another accident. This time he doesn't have to know it happened, but if it happens again." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "Count about 10 minutes then let him go, okay?" Hitachi nodded and left the alley, going back home. Hitachi knows Aizawa probably wouldn't expel him over this. But still, after being scolded by Kuzu, he didn't want to be scolded again by an angry Aizawa. Thankfully, he has a brother willing to cover for him this time. As soon as Hitachi left the alley, Izuku turned to Yagi and stared at him for a few seconds. The blonde looked like he wanted to stick his head in a hole, and Izuku felt Kuzu laughing in the back of his mind. Frankly, he is so petty. Ran out of time again, All Might? Izuku asked, and as the blonde started to sweat cold, he took pity on him and looked away. At least this time, it was because you were in class. He muttered, then asked. What did you think of him? The young Shinsu? Yagi asked, and Izuku nodded. He has a good heart and a good head to match. He reminds me a little of young Aizawa. The blonde replied. I think he'll be a good hero. And his quirk? Kuzu asked, raising an eyebrow. It's powerful, and it has a lot of potential. Yagi replied thoughtfully. I'm not going to lie. I'm not the most unbiased person in this world. I underestimated his quirk in the beginning because it wasn't physical. But his victory over the young Bakugo opened my eyes. Then he sighed. You were right, young Izuku. I'm not doing a good job as a teacher. And for that, I'm sorry. He bowed. It's not me you have to apologize to, All Might. Izuku replied. If you want to apologize to your students, start by getting a real teaching license. You can only work as a hero for 3 hours a day. 2.5, actually. All Might replied, and Izuku raised an eyebrow. My time limit is lowering, and fast. This is why I need to find a successor. Well, in the time when you can't work, start taking classes. With effort, you can get a real teaching license in just 2 years. And since you are already working, unlike me, you will already have the necessary experience. Izuku explained. Just put the same effort into teaching as you put into heroics. Go beyond. Plus ultra. You're right, young Izuku. Thank you. Yogi replied, smiling. This smile was different from his All Might smiles. It seemed a lot more sincere. You're welcome, All Might. Izuku replied, then after thinking for a few seconds, he gave him a piece of paper. That is my number. If you need help with anything, or just want to talk, just call. All Might nodded, and they went their separate ways. Izuku dragged the mugger who had just come out of Hitashi's brainwashing to the police station. He seemed honest about wanting to do better. Kuzu said as they walked home. He's All Might. Izuku replied. He's dumb, oblivious, naive, and many other things. But a liar is not one of them. If only good intentions were enough. Kuzu sighed. Arriving there, Izuku quickly dropped off the thief, filled out the report, and left before he could risk running into Tsukauchi and having to explain what really happened. As much as he loves his uncle, he definitely doesn't want to have to find a way to bypass lie detection to cover up an act of vigilantism by his brother. Not today. After that, Hitachi owes him money. Maybe tomorrow, he will ask Tashi to carry him home. It would be a good payment. And despite his short stature, Izuku is much heavier than he looks. After all, his clothes hide well the amount of muscles he has. The next day, classes went normally as expected. After the last bell, Izuku waited at Field Omega since Hitachi already know where it is. And not even 5 minutes after the bell, Hitachi was walking in. Izuku had previously registered the biometrics of his 4 students, so that they could enter even if he were already there. Izuku soon guided him to the field center, where they had enough space to do the tests. Izuku has 2 goals with this training. The first and most important is to build Hitashi's self-confidence. Izuku knows firsthand what years of abuse and bullying do to a person, but he also knows that these wounds can be healed. They will leave scars, just like the muzzle marks on Hitashi's face, but they will stop hurting one day. The second goal is to test and train his quirk. Due to the nature of his quirk, Hitachi has never had the chance to test what he can and cannot do with it. That changes now. Izuku's brother will have all the support and help he had the chance to have in the past. But the first thing to do is something else. Izuku hands Hitachi a form that Netsu gave him earlier. A form to change the name of his quirk. Hitachi takes the form and looks at Izuku with one eyebrow raised. What is that? I have to ask, who named your quirk Tashi? Izuku asked. My father. Right before he gave me away, he went to register my quirk and demanded to call it brainwashing. Hitachi explained. Fucking quirkus. Kuzu growled. He's an idiot. And if your quirk is brainwashing, I'm the Pope. Brainwashing would cause permanent changes in the person's mind. You can control someone's actions temporarily, but you can't, for example, change their personality. Izuku explained. If I had to suggest a different name, I would say hypnosis or sleepwalking. They both fit what you do. The way the person you control loses consciousness as if he were asleep, and the way your commands make him move is like someone hypnotized or sleepwalking. Wow, this makes sense. Hitachi replied. I feel like people would fear my quirk much less if it had a different name. No use in dwelling on the past. Kuzu said. Even though Izuku could feel he was trying hard to keep his anger in check. It's hard to say if it's good or not that the Shinsus gave Hitachi away. On the one hand, this added abandonment as one of the traumas that Hitachi had to go through repeatedly. But on the other hand, if they had kept Hitachi, the abuse he suffered probably would have come from them. And how much worse could it have been to suffer at the hands of his own parents? The truth is that the only silver lining in this story is the part where Hitachi was taken out of the abusive environment and now can receive all the love he has always deserved. Shaking his head and focusing back on Hitachi, Izuku smiles softly as he sees Hitachi struggling with the name. After thinking for a few minutes, he finally writes a name and gives the formulary back to Izuku. Hypnosis. Is this your final choice? Kuzu asks to make sure. Changing the quirk name a second time would be extremely hard. Yup. Hitachi nods. It is simple, and I can use it to misguide how it works. Hypnotists hypnotize people in many ways. I can use this to hide my activation requirements. Maybe I should start carrying a pocket watch. Your choice. Izuku laughs. Let's start then. Hitachi nods. Izuku hands him a list of commands and explains what they will do. Our first test will be about how your commands work. In this list, I have written down several commands that I want you to tell me to do. Kuzu explains. Some commands are things I can easily do, but Zuku can't, others are the opposite. There are also commands that include using our quirk. Basically, we want to see how specific your commands can be. First, you hypnotize only me. Then only Kuzu. And lastly, both of us at once. Zuku continued. In the future, we will ask Ectoplasm to help you find out how many you can hypnotize at once. But for now, let's start. Alright. Tashi nodded again. You ready, Bunny? Ready when you are. Zuku replied, and then his mind blanked. Hitachi watched for a few seconds as Zuku's eyes became blank, indicating that he was under his control. Not that he needs this indication, he can sense when someone has been caught in his mind. From there, they followed the list of commands, from the simple ones close your eyes. Clap your hands 3 times. Jump on one foot to the more complex ones, dance for 3 minutes. Recite the last poem read in Yamada-sensei's class. Say step by step how to prepare noodles. And the results were interesting, especially when it came to quirk tests. Every now and then, Kuzu would appear to say something. It's kind of strange to see someone who was previously blank-eyed and irresponsive suddenly get back to normal and start talking out of nowhere. But it is also strange to see someone's eyes constantly changing color, and that same person talking to himself. Izuku is strange, and this is normal. The simple commands were all easily accomplished. The commands that included memory varied according to Zuku's memory. Since he wasn't in Yamada's class today, he didn't know the poem, so he kept silent. But when he asked for the step-by-step preparation of noodles, he explained it flawlessly. As for dancing, it depends on the dance. Zuku is skilled in breakdancing, so it was easy for him. But being ordered to dance ballet well, disaster is not enough to explain it. At least Hitachi managed to record some excellent blackmail material for the future. Hitachi can stimulate memory, but he can't make someone remember something they early forgot. And finally, when it comes to quirks, even under Hitachi's command, Zuku can't use fire, and Kuzu can't use telekinesis. When controlling both simultaneously, if Hitachi gives a command without a specific target, the command will be carried out by whoever is most apt to do it. When he asked them to fly to the ceiling and back, Zuku used his telekinesis to do it. But when he asked them to make a complete turn around the field, Kuzu did it. Also, something strange is that his quirk is stronger than he remembers. Hitachi was sure that he needed an answer to trigger it. But tests now have shown that the smallest verbal response, even a groan, works. Upon receiving a command, the hypnotized person will carry it out exactly as Hitachi ordered. When he told Izuku to jump as high as possible, Izuku flew and hit his head on the ceiling. He needs to be more specific with the commands to avoid accidents. In a few hours, Hitachi has learned more about his quirk than he has in his entire life, and he is unsure how to feel about it. He should be happy, but he feels frustrated. He can't help feeling that he should have learned this years ago. At the end of the tests, he releases Izuku, and the two sit down and talk about what they have learned. Hitachi explains his frustrations about how far behind his colleagues he is, and Izuku assures him that he will quickly catch up with the others. Quickly doesn't feel quick enough, though. In his frustration, Hitachi clenches his fists and feels as if there's an energy running through his arm, but he dismisses it as being in his head. Tashi. He barely hears Izuku calling as he punches the ground in frustration. What he hears, however, is the sound of the floor breaking. And what he feels is an absurd pain in his arm. When he looks at his arm, it is completely purple and moving in a way that should not be possible with the existence of bones. Maybe it's the pain, maybe the shock, but all Hitachi can do is scream. What the fuck? Then he passes out. Chapter 27. Hitachi has officially gone insane. It's the only explanation because there's no way he could have suddenly developed a super strength quirk powerful enough to create a crater in the ground and turn his arm into jelly. It was definitely all a dream. He will wake up in his bed at any moment. See? He's waking up. Look, it's his. Wait. This isn't the ceiling of my room. And this isn't my bed. It looks like an infirmary bed. And why is my arm in a cast? Don't tell me it wasn't a dream. As Hitachi tried to figure out what the hell was going on here, he didn't even notice someone coming in until he had a pair of arms wrapped around him and felt his head hit something that looked like a wall. Hitachi, thank God you're okay. He looked up and saw Izuku hugging him and rambling non-stop. I didn't know what to do, so I brought you to Recovery Girl as soon as possible. I mean, I know first aid, but your arm was completely overconnected shoes of the rest shitted end. Hitachi wouldn't even pretend he got half of what Izuku just said. But he was obviously worried about Hitachi, so Hitachi puts his hand on his arm to get his attention. Izuku stops talking immediately and looks at him with watery eyes full of concern. I'm fine, Bunny. He's sure. But I don't know what happened. Actually, how long did I sleep? 2, maybe 3 hours. Kuzu chimed in. Between the tests we did earlier, and the stamina that Granny Chiyo used to heal you, you were completely exhausted. Were it not for your constant state of insomnia, I would say that you would have slept at least 8 to 10 hours. Izuku completed. As for what happened, we were just discussing it when you woke up, Kuzu said. Would you like to hear it now? Or do you prefer to discuss it tomorrow? Hitachi really thought about it for a while. He's still pretty tired, so maybe it's a bad idea. But he really needs to know what happened. Brainwashing no, scratch that, hypnosis is a mental and mental-only quirk. It doesn't make any sense that Hitachi would develop super strength at such a level that he would shatter his own arm. He's not an expert on quirks, but he's pretty sure that's not how they work. Damn, he should leave it until tomorrow. But if he doesn't find out what happened now, he won't be able to sleep. He probably won't be able to sleep anyway, but he doesn't need this worry to make it worse. I want to hear it now, Hitachi finally said. Kuzu examined his face for a few seconds, looking for something, then he sighed. Alright, he said. Can you walk? Here, lean on me. Then he helped Hitachi get up and supported him on the way to the teacher's lounge. When they entered, Hitachi saw Principal Netsu, Aizawa, Recovery Girl, and the skeleton guy Yagi, he thinks from yesterday. For some reason, Aizawa was giving the skeleton guy a murderous glare. Izuku guided Hitachi to the sofa, and then addressed the rest of the people in the room. Well, Hitachi. You know, Aizawa, Granny Chiyo, and Principal Netsu. Kuzu said, then pointed to the skeleton guy. And this is. Hello, young Shinsu. I'm Yogi Toshinori. He said, getting up from his chair. Then, he inflated. And I'm here. No one will ever make Hitachi admit that his chin almost hit the ground. The skeleton guy that Hitachi saved from a mugging yesterday is all fucking Might. All Might? You're All Might? Hitachi asked, looking at every other person in the room. No one else seemed to be surprised, meaning they knew it already. Wait, did I commit vigilantism and risk losing my place in the hero course to save the #1 hero? Vigilantism? Aizawa asked, then Hitachi heard Izuku mouthing a later to him. Yeah. It's a long story. All Might, or should he say, Small Might, replied with a sheepish smile. A long story that you'll explain, Aizawa said, then turned to look at Hitachi. It has to do with what happened with your court today. It's a state secret or something, Izuku said. So regardless of your decision at the end of it all, what is discussed here, stays here. Hitachi nodded, then All Might started explaining. And he wasn't kidding. It was a long story. Like, beginning of the Quirk age, Long story short, 2 brothers, the older one, had possibly the most overpowered quirk in history, being able to give and steal quirks. The younger one was presumably quirkless. The older brother started a war against the world in his attempt to fight against the prejudice that the minority who had quirks suffered in the beginning. And apparently, he was also an overprotective brother, to the point of locking his younger brother in a vault most of his life to protect him. The older brother took pity on his younger brother, and gave him his stockpiling quirk, which in turn turned out to reveal that the younger brother was never quirkless as imagined. His quirk alone had no effect, being only a quirk that could be passed on. But with the addition of the stockpiling quirk, it became what is known today as One for All. With his quirk, the younger brother opposes the older one. The two fought, and the younger brother eventually died. But before the confrontation, he passed the quirk on. The second user did the same and died the same way, and so it went on until All Might, the 8th user, fought and won. But not without cost. The victory cost him his stomach and a lung. He can only maintain his muscular form for 2.5 hours a day, which greatly restricts how much heroism he can do in a day. Frankly, how he is even alive is nothing short of a miracle. All Might believed he had killed All for One, and was looking for a successor to keep the legacy alive. However, the appearance of the League of Villains, specifically the Naomi thing, indicates that All for One may still be alive. Which brings them to what happened yesterday. All Might was out of time when the mugger approached him, or in other words, defenseless. How ironic. When Hitachi saved him, combined with what he said, it made All Might consider him as a possible successor. The thing about One for All is that the quirk can be forcefully given but not taken, and it is passed on by DNA. When All Might accidentally spit blood into Hitashi's MOUTH, by the way, gross, he accidentally gave the quirk to him. Okay, there is so much here to unpack. So, you want the quirk back? Hitachi asked. How do I give it back? Not quite, young Shinsu. All Might replied. I want to ask you if you would accept to be my successor. And at this moment, Hitachi might have become Kaminari because his brain short-circuited. Excuse me. Shouta was not happy. Not in the least. First, he got a call from Izuku. His son was desperate because something happened during his training session with Hitachi. Apparently, Hitachi's arm simply started glowing, and Hitachi punched a crater in the ground and shattered his own arm. Now, Shouta is not an analyst like Izuku or Hisashi, but even he knows that quirks don't mutate like that. Hitachi's quirk is mental, and while some mental quirks eventually develop a physical aspect, Hitachi's definitely does not fit into this. When he arrived at the infirmary and found Netsu talking to Izuku, he knew that his suspicions were correct. The rat, for the first time since Shouta had met him, did not beat around the bush, and immediately told them to go to the teacher's lounge, that what had happened would be explained. Most of the teachers had already left. Shouta was the first to arrive, along with Izuku. Chiyo came next, and then Netsu. The last to arrive, and Shouta knew he was responsible as soon as he entered, was All Might. Izuku explained what happened, and recognition instantly flashed in All Might's eyes. Although before explaining what happened, the giant spent at least 5 minutes freaking out, saying things like how did this happen? And this shouldn't be possible. When the idiot finally calmed down enough to explain about his quirk, he had to be convinced by the principal that yes. They always need to know, since they are Shisu's family now. Shouta regretted not bringing his headache pills today. All Might had just started his explanation when Izuku, who apparently left one of his cameras in the infirmary, warned that Hitachi was waking up and ran sorry, how well to find him. A few minutes later, Izuku and Hitachi entered. Hitachi seemed fine, tired, but Hitachi and tired are practically synonymous at this point. Upon seeing his foster hopefully soon-to-be adopted son, Shouta allowed himself to let out a sigh of relief. The relief didn't last long because shortly after, All Might began to explain exactly what had happened. The fact that the passage of the quirk was an accident that even All Might had no idea was possible, was the only thing that kept Shouta from jumping on him and strangling him with his scarf. But then, All Might asked Hitachi to become his successor, and Shouta almost lost control. And while Hitachi tried to process what he had just heard, Shouta decided to ask his own questions. Yagi? All Might, who seemed to have forgotten who else was in the room, snapped his head to Shouta and promptly started to sweat. You know what you're asking him, don't you? Aizawa. All Might sputtered. I know this is sudden, but I don't care it's sudden, Yagi. This isn't the problem. Shouta cut him. The problem, All Might Kuzu complimented, is that you are asking my brother to inherit an immensely self-destructive quirk that comes with the ultimate supervillain as a bonus. Can you even teach him to control the quirk? What would be your advice? Izuku asked. I would say, clench your butt cheeks and yell smash. All Might replied. This is how I do. A few seconds of silence passed, which was interrupted by the sound of a slap. Everyone turned to Izuku, who had facepalmed hard. Should have known. Izuku muttered. All Might, did you have this kind of problem when you received the quirk? No? All Might replied. I could use 100% from the get-go. And that is where the problem lies. Izuku said. You're a genius. There's nothing wrong with that, but geniuses don't understand the difficulty of things that come easy to them. Hitachi suddenly raised his head and interrupted them. Can you give me some time to think? Of course, my boy. All Might replied, smiling. Ultimately, whether or not Tashi will accept is his choice. Kuzu said. Having said that, Izuku got up and guided Hitachi out of the room. Shouta wasn't sure where he was guiding him, but Shouta can call him later to know. Let's make a few things clear here, All Might. Shouta said, turning a quirk glare at All Might. Who else knows? My former mentor Gran Torino, Sasaki, and Amasa. All Might replied. So, Tsukauchi knows about the secret too. Makes sense, he's a good friend of Yagi, and it would be impossible to hide it from him. Fair enough. Let's start with something simple. Whoever Hitachi wants to tell the secret, he will tell it. Shouta said, raising his hand to interrupt when All Might opened his mouth, probably to argue. I understand how dangerous this Yagi secret is. However, you have a network of people you trust enough to know. Hitachi will need his. Alright. All Might conceded. Second. Shouta continued. Even if Hitachi becomes your successor, he will be his own hero. The path he chooses to follow, you will respect. Be it Limelight, Twilight, Rescue, or even Underground. This will not be a problem. All Might nodded. Several of the past users were Undergrounds. My mentor was Twilight, but she had almost no press presence. When I accepted the quirk, I wanted to become the symbol of peace, but I won't impose this on my successor. I just want to keep the legacy alive. Great, so they are on the same page here. And lastly, if he refuses, you will not try to convince him otherwise. The final decision is his, and you respect it. Shouta said. And if he accepts, I refuse to let him have to deal alone with a 200-year-old supervillain. I know this is out of your control, but we will do everything possible, so that he doesn't have to deal with this all for one. On this, we both agree. All Might said firmly. I promised on Nana's grave that I would be the one to end this war once and for all. I may be wounded and limited now, but the promise still stands. My successor will not have the responsibility of dealing with that monster on his shoulders. Shouta nodded at him, satisfied with the answer. Despite the two of them not really seeing eye to eye. Despite how much Shouta still thinks he is an idiot. He can admit that as a hero, All Might deserves his respect, if nothing else, for his determination. Chapter 28 Waking up early on Saturday should be illegal. But unfortunately, it isn't, and Netsu loves to do things on the edge of the law. After the whole situation with One for All had been explained, Shouta still had to patrol that night, with a migraine, by the way. He's sure that the rat does it on purpose just to annoy him. The reason for this meeting was not even important, a simple update on the security of the sports festival. A meeting that could have been an email. Sighing, Shouta continued his way through the halls until he reached the familiar door. Placing his hand on the biometric scanner, he heard it beep, and the door opened. Immediately the temperature rose, and Shouta felt sweat beginning to form on his forehead. Inside the room, there was molten robot debris everywhere. The short green-haired figure that Shouta loves so much was at the center of it all. Flames danced around him, moving at his signal, attacking each approaching robot and then retreating behind him, accumulating in a shape resembling a snake with several heads. The flames moved like a snake attacking with each arm movement, and the robot unlucky enough to be in the way was incinerated. Deciding to announce his presence, Shouta activates his quirk, and the multi-headed snake disappears in a cloud of smoke. Noticing his quirk failing, Izuku turns to the entrance. Shouta gets a good look at a pair of green eyes that soon change to the usual blue and yellow. I feel that I should be amazed at how quickly you are learning to control this merging thing, Shouta said, approaching and throwing them a water bottle. But by now, I should be used to it. It just feels natural. Izuku shrugged, taking a sip of the water. Like it should have always been like this. How long can you keep it? 15 to 20 minutes at most. Cruiser replied. More than that, and we start getting headaches like when Zu overuses his quirk. This limit should increase over time. Zuko continued. But for now, this is our maximum. Don't push yourself too hard. Shouta replied. Rest is important too. You want to talk, mister? I had 2 hours of collective sleep this week. Cruiser teased. Before Shouta could retort, Izuku's cell phone started ringing. Izuku answered the call and began to grin maniacally a few seconds later. Tomorrow, then? Cruiser asked. Alright, I'll get everything ready. Then he hung the call. We got him, Izuku said, turning to leave the room. Shouta went after him as the cleaning bots started entering the arena. Whatever this is about, who is he kidding? Only one person, a rat, can make his son grin like that. Someone is completely screwed. Crazy not crazy. Hey Dobby. Renington House. Reality. Crazy not crazy. So dry. You make it seem like you aren't happy to hear from me. Renington House. Maybe because I'm not. Every time you text me, it's to give me more trouble. Crazy not crazy. Oh, I'm sure you'll want a part on this one. I have here a couple of tickets to the arrest of a certain flaming trash can. Interested? Renington House. What? You got him. Crazy not crazy. He can't escape that one. Let's sweeten the deal. You come with us tomorrow. And I'll let you personally put the cuffs on him. Renington House. And the catch. Crazy not crazy. The other Todoricus will be there as well. Look. I will not force you to talk to them or reveal your identity. But they will see you. And although I don't know if Shouta will recognize you, the others probably will. Renington House. Can I bring Himiko? Crazy not crazy. She would come even if I said she couldn't. But tell her that if she stabs anyone, I will confiscate all her knives. Renington House. Fine. I'm in. I can't run forever. Might as well deal with this now. Anxiety and anticipation. These two words sum up perfectly how Dobby was feeling at that moment. Both feelings only increase as the car he is in turns the corner, and the Todoricus' residence comes into his view. In the car's back seat, Himiko was playing with a knife, doing various stunts that should not be done in a moving car. Izuku was in the passenger seat, watching the scenery go by with a casual smile on his face. And Aizawa, driving like the crazy driver he is. How someone who has driven through 15 stoplights and almost ran over someone 7 times in less than 3 miles has a driver's license is one of the great mysteries of this world. Ironically, when he saw a cat in the street, he stopped the car and waited for it to pass. Finally, they parked in front of the classic Japanese-style house. Looking around, Dobby noticed several plainclothes policemen positioned in other cars on the street. Tsukauchi, who wouldn't let go of his overcoat and hat for the world, was on the other side of the street. What was that, Netsu? Izuku said the principal was part of this case, but Dobby didn't think he would be present at the arrest. And along with them were Dobby's heart leaped when he saw them, the 3 Todoroki siblings. Fayumi and Natsuo have not changed so much from what he remembered. But Shouta did. Not only in height, but his posture was also different than he remembered. Dobby's hands began to shake at the thought of talking to them. Wouldn't they hate him for abandoning them? As much as he had spent years trying to convince himself that he no longer cared about his old family, he never could. He still cares for them. And he doesn't know what he will do if they reject him. And after all this time, does he even have the right to be Tuya again? What if? Stop overthinking, Dabi. He heard it at the same time as he felt a hand squeezing his. Then he felt something sharp poke him in the rib. Or else stab you. Dabi chuckled at it. Only Himiko can take a reassurance and turn it into a threat. You want to talk to them now? Izuku asked, turning that blue eyes at him. No? Let's deal with the old man first. Dabi replied. As you wish. Kuzu said, giving Dabi a pair of Quirk suppressing handcuffs. Then he glanced at his phone. Endeavor suspects nothing. He doesn't care enough to realize that Natsuo and Fayumi are gone, and he thinks Shouta is at UA for extra training. Alright, it's showtime, he said, slipping to his Dabi persona. Showtime. Kuzu grinned at him. Go on, Dabi-chan. Himiko pushed him towards the entrance. Izuku, Dabi, and Aizawa walked toward the front door. Izuku grabbed a sheet of paper from somewhere, probably the same place where he keeps his notebook, and then rang the bell. A few seconds passed before they heard the door being opened, and here was the man of the house. As always with his flaming mustache, if someone had said he slept like that, Dabi would probably have believed them. Endeavor looked confused at the three men standing in his doorway. He knew Aizawa and Izuku, but did not seem to recognize Dabi. Before he could say anything, Aizawa activated his quirk, wiping that ridiculous mustache off his face, and Izuku began to read the sheet in his hands. Todoroki Enji, you're under arrest for the crimes of corruption, abuse of power, multiple homicides, whether intentional or not, quirk marriage, domestic abuse, and child abuse. Izuku explained. But what are you talking? The moment Endeavor raised his arm toward Izuku, Dabi, with immense satisfaction, slapped the cuffs on him. Izuku ignored him and continued reading the sheet. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have a right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. The Miranda warning. Dabi is sure this isn't used in Japan. Is Izuku just playing with him? What a piece of crap this is. Let me go immediately. Endeavor demanded. No, I don't think I will. Izuku replied, smirking at the man. You have gone unpunished for too long. Time to face the consequences of your actions, Endeavor. It won't stay like that. I am the #2 hero. Endeavor replied. Oh, how cute. He still thinks his position will save him. Izuku grinned at Dabi, then his smile vanished, and he pinned Endeavor with a glare. Do you really think that the commission will continue to cover for you? Do you think they wouldn't throw you under the bus to save face? Well, they may try, but this time it will be impossible. Even they cannot deny evidence backed up by the Truth Squad. Especially when you have someone who has come back from the dead just to testify against you. Endeavor's eyes widened at this. It's over, old man. Dabi said with a lazy smirk. You lost. Endeavor stared at Dabi for a few seconds until recognition flashed in his eyes that widened so much that Dabi thought they would jump out of the sockets. Tuya? He asked. Miss me, Dad? Dabi asked. What am I talking about? Of course, you didn't. Endeavor opened and closed his mouth several times, looking like a fish out of water. After trying to say something for a few seconds, he just shook his head and followed Aizawa silently towards the police car at the end of the street. They could have stopped the car in front of the house, but no one wanted to miss the chance to have Endeavor do a walk of shame in handcuffs. Surprisingly, Endeavor got into the police van without much fuss. Maybe it was the shock of seeing his supposedly dead son in front of him. But regardless, he was put in the police van and taken out of there. Aizawa went along with the police, and Izuku stayed behind, probably to stay with Dabi. Turning again to where the other Todoricas were, his eyes met Fayumi's, and she gasped. Dabi took a deep breath and started walking toward them. Time to face the past. Looking through the car's mirror, Shouta saw Enji, who refused to look up. Shouta has been a hero for several years, and even before that, in all his life, he had never seen Endeavor act so subdued. What happens now? Endeavor asked, still not looking up. Shouta thought for a few seconds. It depends on the judge's decision, he explained. Natsuo and Fayumi are already of age, so they can live independently if they choose. As for Shouta, he has 3 possibilities. If Todoroki Rei is declared stable and he wants to live with her, she will have custody of him. Otherwise, he can choose between Tuya or becoming a UA ward. Technically speaking, the second and third options are basically the same. When everything is resolved, and Tuya is properly declared to be alive, he will be placed in Project Vigilante as Izuku, and will become an UA ward. If Shouta wants to live with him or become an UA ward as well, he will live at the school anyway. As for you, frankly, despite all your crimes, your sentence will end up being very short. 25 years at most. Unfortunately, most of his crimes can be justified as accidents. After all, he is a hero with a highly destructive quirk. The commission will try to cover it up as much as possible. They don't want the public to know why you are being arrested. But one thing is certain, Endeavor. You will never get your license back. Shouta smirked and stared at him through the mirror. You will never be the #1 hero. Endeavor did not answer, but Shouta saw him clenching his fists on his knees. Shouta smiled whitened at this. Let him suffer. Petty, he knows, but he never denied that he was. And in this case, it is more than justified. After all, this man abused one of his children for years. Not that he will admit to anyone that he sees them that way. But all his students are his children. Izuku kept their distance while Dabi talked to his family. They and Himiko were close enough to intervene if something went wrong, but far enough away to give them privacy. Tsukauchi and Etsu walked away for the same reason. Fortunately, their concern was unnecessary. Izuku watched Dabi approach the Todoricus with a shy smile on his face. He said something, and the three of them froze, but it wasn't bad. Fayumi covered her mouth as she tried to hold back her tears. Natsuo was a little less shy and immediately tackled him in a hug. Shouta literally froze. A trail of ice appeared beneath his feet. But the hesitation did not last long. In a few seconds, the four siblings were in a group hug. Izuku smiled and, placing his hand on Himiko's shoulder, guided her away from there to give them the privacy they needed. They have a lot to discuss, but Izuku knows they will be fine. Chapter 29. The week that followed was, to sum it up in one word, chaotic. The Endeavor trial was extremely rushed by both Netsu and the HPSC, which tried its best to keep the case out of the press. This caused the trial to begin the very next day. The trial lasted 3 days, not because it was a difficult decision, but because of the number of witnesses brought to testify against Endeavor. Most of them were civilians who lost their property or loved ones as collateral damage from the actions of the hero. On the last day, all the Todoricus were also called to witness. One by one, they told of their experiences with their father's neglect and abuse. The last to testify was Tuya, who told everyone about his experience with Endeavor's training that led to his supposed death. All statements were made in the presence of Mr. Truth, and with Tsukauchi present in the room, which was enough to validate each of them. Endeavor's sentence was decided to be 25 years in Tartarus, where he will have to undergo weekly anger management therapy sessions. He will have a chance for parole in 15 years in case of good behavior. However, he will never get his Pro Hero license back, regardless of what happens. Endeavor is officially retired. With the sentence given, the HPSC had no way to hide it anymore. So they did exactly what Izuku predicted they would do and threw all the blame on Endeavor to save face. The speech made to the media was that they had been investigating the former hero, and found out about his crimes. The HPSC will not tolerate this kind of behavior, and will blah blah. Baloney, but their turn will come one day. Because of what happened, Shadow Todoroki was given a week's leave from school, in which he and his siblings were finally reunited and reconciled with their mother. After the examinations were done, Rei was deemed stable enough to leave the mental institute. However, she did not consider herself fit enough to regain custody of Shadow. After a family discussion, it was decided that Shadow would live in the UA together with Tuya, who would become his legal guardian. Tuya and Himiko have finally agreed to join Project Vigilante. Tuya will be mentored by President Mick. With Himiko, it was a little more complicated. Because of her quirk and acting skills, Himiko wanted to go into underground with a focus on undercover missions, which is not a problem. Izuku was only forced to be limelight because he was the first participant in the project. So he ended up being the face of the project. But at the same time that she demonstrated extreme skill as an underground, Himiko also showed a quick mind and analytical skills far above average. She also showed great interest in the support area. Ultimately, Himiko will have a dual mentorship. Their mentors will be Aizawa for underground and Majima for support and analysis. The two will live at UA as skill wards. Despite having lived on the street, Tuya has kept up with his studies, having graduated online. As such, he will only be part of Class 1 and Heroics classes. On the other hand, Himiko will be enrolled in the class in Minetta's place, despite being a year older than the rest of the class. Class 1 accepted their new classmate easily, especially after it was explained that Himiko would be part of the same project that trained Izuku. And Himiko almost immediately assumed the role of class big sister. The crazy big sister who will stab anyone who gets out of line, but still. The weeks until the sports festival went by quickly, and Izuku couldn't be prouder of the students' progress. Aoyama and Hagakure began quirk counseling with Yamada, who specializes in hard-to-control quirks. Aizawa started an extra class in quirkless fighting, open to anyone interested, in and out of the hero course. Tokoyami, Kaminari, Todoroki, and Hitachi all decided to join. And speaking of Izuku's personal students, their progress has also been incredible. Their control is still far from perfect, but it's much better than it was a few weeks ago. It's been 3 heroic classes since Kaminari last fried his brain. Tokoyami has shown more emotion, and Dark Shadow has become much less agitated since they started therapy. Todoroki has begun to tentatively use his fire in training. And Hitachi, taking into account that he now has not only 1 but 2 quirks to master, we can say that his progress is the most impressive of the group. After accepting All Might's offer, he immediately began training with One for All. Of course, with Aizawa ever present and one blink away from erasing the quirk, should Hitachi risk injury again. Izuku's analyses, as always, shine here. If we ignore the whole history and legacy of One for All, we will see that the quirk is nothing special. It is just a stockpiling quirk. Theories about All Might's quirk are many on the internet. But from what Izuku sees here, it is easy to tell that it is not a strength enhancer. One for All is simply energy. An almost infinite source of energy that continues to grow stronger with each new user. Izuku also theorizes that perhaps All Might is not as quirkless as he thought. Many presumably quirkless people actually have quirks that are either so weak as to be imperceptible or have activation requirements so specific that the user has never been able to activate them. Izuku theorizes that All Might's case is the former. The muscular form of All Might has all the characteristics of a transformation quirk. If Izuku is correct, this was All Might's original quirk, but he could only activate it after it was strengthened by One for All. In the same way that Hitashi's quirk was strengthened by One for All. Anyway, Hitashi's training was much more focused on control than power. After all, brute force for Hitachi will always be plan B. The primary plan is to try to hypnotize the enemy and make them surrender without the need for confrontation. Not to mention that Hitachi decided to pursue the career of a Twilight hero, so he doesn't intend to try to become the #1 hero. He doesn't need to call attention to himself. A little too early for Hitashi's taste, the morning of the sports festival has begun. At the Aizawa residence, everyone was getting ready to leave when Izuku's phone rang. Reality speaking. Izuku answered the call, and his smile soon dropped. "I'm on my way." "Where to?" Aizawa asked. "Hosue." Izuku replied. "We need to go now." They saw Stendhal. "Be careful, Izuku," Aizawa said. "You know he won't be easy." "We know, Dad." Izuku nodded and went to the door. "We will be coordinating with Team Idaten for this mission. Say hi to Tensei for me. And call me as soon as the mission is over." Aizawa replied. "I don't care if it's in the middle of the third event. I'll answer you." "We will. Make sure to get the recordings from Netsu. We will watch this festival if it is the last thing I do," Izuku said as they stepped out of the door. Then they stopped, turned to Hitachi, and tackled him into a hug. "Good luck, Hitachi. You'll do great today." Saying that, they left and jumped off the fucking balcony. Hitachi almost had a heart attack as he ran up to the balcony and looked down. He then saw Izuku flying at high speed in the direction Hitachi assumed was Hosue's. "Did they always do that?" Hitachi asked. "No, usually Kuzu does a little show before jumping." Aizawa shrugged and returned to his coffee mug. They were in a hurry. "How come you are not gray yet?" Hitachi asked as he pulled himself a mug. "I met them when they were 8, and the first time we talked they jumped off a building," Aizawa replied. "If I had a nickel for every time they almost gave me a heart attack, I could fill a swimming pool and swim in the money." "That's rough," Hitachi commented. "You haven't seen half of it." Aizawa sighed tiredly. "Anyway, Izuku left, and I doubt you want burnt toast for breakfast before the sports festival. Get dressed up and we'll get something to eat before we go." Hitachi nodded and went to his room to put on his uniform. How the hell did Hisashi manage to hook Shouta into the commentator's booth? That's the last time Shouta bets with him on Uno. Damn loud blonde cheater. To make matters worse, he wouldn't even have Izuku's company as expected. Shouta looks at his cell phone for the 20th time in the last hour. Obviously, Hisashi notices. "Come on, Shu. The baby will be alright," Hisashi said, smiling. "You know he's capable." "I know, Hisashi." Shouta sighed. "But it's Stain we're talking about. How many victims has he already made?" "I stopped counting after the 30th, Hisashi replied. "But Izuku has been studying his patterns for years. Not to mention all the information Dabi was able to dig up. If anyone can catch Stain, it's him." "On that we agree." Shouta smirked. "And, where's Tuya?" "I'd rather die than be a commentator on this thing," Hisashi said, emulating Dabi's voice. "So he'll be assisting Nimiri instead," he said, grinning. "I imagine that he is re-evaluating his life choices at this very moment," Shouta replied. In a preparation room, a heavily scarred man glared at the uniform he would be required to wear for this event, and vowed revenge on all involved. "Oh? Totally." Hisashi grinned. "Oh, it's about to begin. Well," Shouta sighed. "Let's get it over with." The sports festival was about to begin, and everyone's nervousness was apparent. At least half of the students were pacing around in the waiting room. Others, like Bakugo, were a bit more subtle in their anxiety. The blonde disguised his nervousness with confidence, but it only takes a little attention to realize how many times he needed to grab a special handkerchief to wipe the sweat from his hands. Hitachi was also anxious, but for different reasons. To be honest, he didn't even intend to get past the first event. His control over One for All is still basic at best. But at the same time, there is someone he wants to impress. Someone who, at this moment, is in another city on a mission. By the way, who the hell is Stendhal? Izuku had mentioned that name a few times, but refused to elaborate when Hitachi asked. The only thing he knows is that whoever he is dangerous. Tokoyami, Kaminari, Shinsu. Hitachi looked up and saw Todoroki looking straight at him. Objectively speaking, I think I am stronger than you. However, the four of us were trained by Izuku. Your point? Hitachi asked, raising an eyebrow. I owe him a lot, and I intend to prove that it was worth it. Todoroki replied, and Hitachi could swear his eyes were glowing from how intense they were. He never saw so much emotion in his bicolor colleague. Consider this a declaration of war. I intend to go all out to defeat you. Kaminari closed the case he was looking at. He had a choker on his neck that looked like just decoration but was, in fact, the new support gear made to keep his electricity away from his brain. Students in the Hero course can use up to 2 pieces of support gear, as long as it has been pre-approved by the principal, power loader, and their homeroom teacher. Most didn't take much advantage of this, but Hitachi saw that the case Kaminari was looking at had something other than the choker. Whatever it is, the loud blonde has a card up his sleeve. Well, what can I say to that? Kaminari grinned. I accept the challenge, dude. I will show you what I am made of. I prefer to hide in the darkness. But this situation requires us to show ourselves. Tokoyami nodded. We'll make Aizu proud of us. Dark Shadow chirped. Hitachi smiled as he made his decision. He adjusted his capture scarf on his neck and turned to Todoroki. Very well, Todoroki-kun. He sent his best impersonation of Aizawa's grin. But I don't intend to lose. And I'm sure no one else intends to lose either. So it's better if you give your all. Eyes, it's time. Niida said and started organizing the students into a single line to enter the stadium. It was not originally Hitachi's plan to attract attention. But after that declaration of war, let no one ever say that he is a coward. Izuku was sitting on top of the tallest building in Hosue. On his mask, each eye showed the images of one of his cameras flying at high speed through the city's alleys. To capture Stain, the Idodin team sent several heroes and sidekicks specialized in speed, but Izuku is the only one who can fly. In the same way that 90% of the heroes with fire quirks were concentrated in Endeavor's agency, 90% of the flying heroes are part of the Hawk's agency. Unfortunately, Team Idodin doesn't have anyone who can fly despite its many highly mobile heroes. This deficiency meant that Izuku alone ended up in charge of patrolling the city from the skies. Their cameras can focus on 2 places at once, but their search radius is still limited. But this minor inconvenience will not stop Izuku. Stendhal often attacks heroes who patrol alone. To minimize the chances of a surprise attack, each hero is moving with at least 2 sidekicks. Each alley is being carefully searched for any clue to his whereabouts. Ingenium speaking. Izuku heard on his comms. I have visual contact with the target. Sending location. Izuku received the location on his phone. Reality speaking. Izuku replied. On my W. He saw me and is running away. Ingenium said. I'm giving chase. Ingenium out. Wait, stop, Ingenium. Don't go alone. Izuku said, but there was no reply. Damn it. We need to hurry. Izuku said. No other hero can keep up with Ingenium. When he reaches Stendhal, he will be alone. Kuzu said. At least he left his tracker activated. 5 minutes. Northeast from here. Izuku said. We can get there in 2. Come on. Then they jumped from the rooftop and started flying. No hero will be named today. Not if they have something to say. Chapter 30. Todoroki is usually someone inexpressive. Like, no one in the room has ever seen him show any kind of expression beyond his usual disinterest. So imagine everyone's shock when he just fell to the floor and started rolling around laughing, as if he had just heard the best joke of the century. Itachi is sure that this has something to do with the guy who entered the stadium together with Namiri-sensei. He definitely looks uncomfortable wearing that tight outfit that looked like a male version of Midnight's costume. Wait, is he wearing heels? Hey, isn't that the guy who takes the heroics class with us? Kaminari asked. The one who showed up with Toga. Oh, right. Tuya, isn't it? Kirishima replied. Isn't he Todoroki's bra-o? He snapped his fingers, then looked back at Todoroki. ICC can't be believed, Todoroki said while wheezing like a tea kettle. TTH, they managed to get him to wear something other than jeans and an oversized hoodie. Meanwhile, Tuya was alternating between sending his brother the dirtiest look he could muster and glaring at Midnight. Good thing he doesn't have laser vision. Midnight, completely unfazed by the situation, cracks her whip to get the students' attention. At least Todoroki has stopped laughing, although he is still shaking, trying to hold himself together while avoiding looking at his brother. Itachi turns his attention back just in time to hear President Mick finish announcing the classes, and pass the voice to Midnight. Because apparently, someone thought it was a good idea to put the 18-plus hero as the host of an event full of hormonal teenagers. Netsu is a sadist. Now for the student pledge. Welcome to the stage, the person who scored the highest on the entrance exam. Bakugo Katsuki. Bakugo takes the stage with all the confidence he constantly exudes. Hitachi has mixed feelings about the angry Pomeranian. Izuku explained his story a few weeks ago, and Hitachi is not petty enough to hold the sins of a 5-year-old child over his head. Especially since Izuku has already forgiven him. But on the other hand, Bakugo definitely needs to have some humility too. He is powerful but not invincible. I just want to say Bakugo starts as soon as he gets to the microphone. That I'm going to win. The booing starts instantly, but Bakugo ignores it and smirks into the microphone. He has just painted a gigantic target on his back, and he is loving every second of it. Well, no one can say that this one lacks confidence. His ashy sweat drops. Let's just see if he has the skills to back up his claims. Shouta said in his usual bored voice. Alright, let's put this show on the road, Hisashi announced. Now, my fair Midnight, what will be the first event? I'm glad you asked, gentlemen, Namuri said, then cracked her whip again. Then a giant wheel was raised from the ground and started spinning to sort out what the first event would be. It was just a show for the audience. The 3 events have already been decided in advance, and all the teachers already know. But for the students, it will be a surprise. An obstacle course. Hisashi cheered. 4 kilometers, several obstacles along the way. Who can overcome the challenges and finish first? The students all began to mingle in the starting line, and Shouta took this moment to check his phone one more time. Damn, still nothing from Izuku. So, Eraser, what do you think the students should pay attention to first? Hisashi asked. The tunnel. Shouta replied dryly. Could you elaborate? Hisashi asked after a few seconds of silence. No? Shouta replied. Eloquent as always. Hisashi muttered. Alright, listeners. Let's put this show on the road. Shouta glanced once again at his phone. Still nothing. Stay safe, Izuku. He muttered to himself and then turned back to pay attention to the event, just in time to see Todoroki literally freeze the competition. Izuku is fast. He has spent several years training his mobility, both in his time as a vigilante and during his training with Shao. In the air, he is second only to Hawks. But even with all his speed, he cannot teleport. Getting from point A to point B takes time. And even though he can make this 5-minute travel in just 2, it still feels like it's taking hours. When he finally arrives at the place where Ingenium's signal had stopped, he quickly feels the panic coming on. No sign of Stendhal, no sign of Ingenium. Looking at the ground, Izuku finds a small piece of a tracker device. Damn it, Ingenium. That's why I told you to put this under your helmet. Kuza yelled, then tuned into his own comms. This is duality. We found Ingenium's tracker. Izuku continued. It is in the middle of the street, and there are no signs of combat. He must have lost it in his pursuit. Roger that. One of the support heroes answered. We are sending the other sidekicks to expand the search area. Perfect, we'll leave the tracker here. It has been about 2 minutes since the signal stopped moving. From their speed, we would say to make a search radius of 1 to 1.5 kilometers. Kuzu replied. We'll resume our search from the sky. If we find him, we will activate our tracker. Keep the paramedics ready. Izuku said, already taking flight. And remember to pay close attention to the alleys. That's where he strikes. Roger that. The support said. Good luck, Duality. Thank you. They replied together. Duality out. Wasting no time, Izuku sent out the right camera and let Kuza watch the images as he flew and checked alley by alley. Where are you, Ingenium? 10 million points. That's a lot of points. Even if you count all the other points combined, it won't reach that total. In other words, whoever has that band is guaranteed to be the first place. Well, in a cavalry battle, the best thing to do is to recruit good allies. But since Shouta is basically the target, most of the students are avoiding him. This could be a problem. Hey Todoroki. Kaminari calls him. Shouta turns around and sees the blonde man approaching with Tokoyami and Shinsu right behind him. What do they want? They are against each other, aren't they? Su. Kaminari starts. I was thinking. Since, you know we are all, Hitachi puts a hand on his mouth to interrupt his rambling. We will face each other, and that is obvious. But we have the same sensei. Since this is a group event, why don't we take the opportunity to show what he has taught us? Shinsu explained. The last event will probably be one-on-one fights. But this event is a good chance to show our teamwork. Shouta thought about it for a moment. Shinsu has a good point. They have never worked as a team before, but Izuku always emphasizes how important teamwork is. If we are going to do that, Shouta says, let's make it memorable. Oh, I like how you think. Shinsu smirks. You are the writer. No, I'll be on the left and Kaminari on the right. We'll take care of the defense. Todoroki explains. Which leaves Tokoyami in the front. Dark Shadow is best suited to steal points after all. Shinsu says. Much of the class still underestimates you. But you are the most agile. Kaminari says. And you can dominate the mind of anyone foolish enough to approach carelessly. Tokoyami adds his 2 cents. So you should be the writer. Perfect. They say together. Alright, time's up. Midnight announces. Let's start the cavalry battle. Time to make chaos. Dark Shadow chirps, and they take positions. Izuku, assemble. Oh, these 4 teamed up. Prepare for chaos. Shouta sighed. Looks like your problem child's problem children teamed up. Hisashi grinned. Alright, listeners. Let's start the cavalry battle. We have a few interesting teams in the game. Let's see what they'll do. Shouta could have sworn he saw the eyes of these 4 gleaming with mischief. What are these problem children planning? As soon as midnight announces the start of the game, more than half of the teams immediately zeroes onto Team Shinsu, obviously aiming at the 10 million headband. But if only it were that easy. Todoroki steps on the ground, hurling his ice in all directions, but unlike the indiscriminate attack of the first event, this one had a target. As the ice spreads, he steps with his other foot, launching a wave of fire that melts the ice, creating a massive water puddle. Kaminari goes into action right away by rubbing his hands together like a defibrillator, and then pressing his palms into the water on the ground. To conclude the attack, Dark Shadow shields the team because, apparently, shadows don't conduct electricity. The light from the attack stuns him, but he resists. Impressing Shouta is difficult, but even he admits that it was a nice combo. And with this Shinsu team combo, all the reckless attackers who ran after the 10 million points without strategy are stunned. Hisashi announces. But look, they are not finished yet. Now, Team Shinsu is running between the stunned teams, while Dark Shadow steals their bands. But they already have the 10 million points. They don't need more. A logical strategy. Even with the 10 million points, it is always good to have a backup in case they end up losing it. Shouta replied. Is it a compliment I hear? Hisashi smirked. Shouta ignored it and looked back at the arena. Team Shinsu had 4 matching grins. Very familiar grins. Oh, God. The rat is multiplying. Shouta said under his breath. It is obvious that they learned that grin from Izuku. But the one who corrupted Shouta's son was the rat. And look at that. The other teams have started to recover from this initial attack, and are already moving again. Hisashi said. The cavalry battle is just beginning. Hitachi smiled as he fooled yet another team of idiots. It's amazing how simple jab at their pride, and they'll respond to anything. The most impressive part is that the Bakugo team has not tried to attack them head-on so far. Apparently, the Pomeranian has decided to go after the copycat from Class B. And 2 more minutes. Mix-sensei announced. Hitachi grinned and looked to Todoroki, who nodded at him. Time for chaos. Hitachi grinned as he took off the 10 million points headband. Hey, guys. He called, and everyone looked at him. Catch. He threw the headband over his shoulder. All the teams started running, but before anyone could get there, Todoroki launched the biggest attack Hitachi had ever seen him make toward the headband. The other teams had to shield their eyes. The temperature in the arena dropped to the point that most of them began to shiver. But what is that? Team Shinsu literally buried the 10 million points in a giant iceberg. Mix-sensei announced. Is it even allowed? No rule says that it's not. Midnight shrugged. Problem children. As always sensei said, and Hitachi has been living with the teacher long enough to recognize the fondness in his voice. I wonder if anyone can get through the iceberg and get the points. Dark Shadow said. Nah. No one here is capable. The provocation worked, and half the teams started attacking the iceberg while they quietly moved out of the way, now that they were no longer the primary target. Tunnel vision will not help them. Tokoyami said. Time for the final assault. Saying this, Dark Shadow immediately lunged at the same time as Hitachi threw his scarf, grabbing as many headbands as possible, while Mix-sensei began the final countdown. 10-9-8 The teams attacking the iceberg made a desperate last push to try to get through. After all, most of them had 0 points. 7650, look, there's Bakugo, blasting himself towards Hitachi to try and grab his headbands. 432 Bakugo reaches his right arm to attack Hitachi and 1. And it's over. He falls face-first into the dirt. Alright. The cavalry battle is over. Midnight announces. In the end, no one had the 10 million points. Now, let's take a look at the scoreboard. Mix says. In first place, Team Shinsu, consisting of Shinsu Hitachi, Tokoyami Fumikage, Todoroki Shouta, and Kaminari Denki. The audience cheered as Hitachi made an exaggerated bowing motion. In second place, Team Bakugo, consisting of Bakugo Katsuki, Kirishima Aijuru, Ashido Mina, and Shiro Hanta. In third place, Team Asui, consisting of Asui Tsayu, Ida Tenya, Uraka Chako, and Hatsume. The audience decreased in volume when Team Bakugo was announced, but came back in full force when Team Asui was announced. And last but not least, in fourth place, we have the Aoi Rozu team, consisting of Aoi Rozu Momo, Shaoji Mezu, and Aoi Amayuga. And since this team had only 3 members, one of the members of the 5th place team will go to the next round. So, Team Monoma, choose a member. After a short discussion, they decide that Monoma will move on to the next round. Alright. The third event will start after lunch period. Midnight says. You heard it. For those of you who didn't pass, don't worry. We still have many recreational activities that everyone can participate in. As for the third event, these are the brackets. Mix said. Zero Hanta vs Shutadorki Yaoi Rosamomo vs Kaminari Elda Tenyo vs Hatsume Shidomina vs Asu Itsayu Ai Amiyuga vs Tokoya Ami Funikichi Kurashima Aijuro vs Shaoji Mezu Umanama Nido vs Shinsu Hitachi Yoraka Chako vs Akatsuki. We'll be right back after the break. Make announce, then turned off the microphones. Hitachi accompanied his friends to the cafeteria to get food, but on the way, he checked his phone. Izuku didn't send any messages, not that he expected anything. Even if Izuku is back by now, they surely wouldn't want to distract Hitachi from the event. They are considerate like that. Still, at least an "I'm fine" would be nice to receive. Hitachi is worried about them. Hitachi sighs and then runs to catch up with his friends. He hopes Izuku will be proud of the chaos they have created here. Found them. Kuzu announces as they fly through the alleys. They are on the camera. Let's go. Izuku says. Status. Ingenium is down. We need to hurry. Kuzu replies. Stendhal is Monwobi now. But as soon as he's done, he'll want to finish the job. Then we better be faster. Hang in there, Ingenium. Well guys, that is it for now. Make sure to like and subscribe anyway later.